Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and let us turn now to lecture, what is this, 5 of Principles of Grammar. We want to continue with our discussion of verbs, and more specifically verbals, and conclude that first before we turn to pronouns. And we have one last topic under verbals. Last time we did which two verbals? Remember, participles and gerunds. And now we're going to the last verbal, infinitives, the infinitive. Now this name, infinitive, hello? You with me? This name, infinitive, derives from the word infinite. The same root. Infinite means unlimited. And what it actually means in this context is that there is no restriction as to the part of speech that an infinitive can represent. You know, for instance, a participle is always an adjective. A gerund is always a noun. An infinitive can be at 3 different parts of speech depending upon its use. An adverb, an adjective, or a noun. And consequently, it's not restricted. It is unlimited, essentially, in its function. However, having said that, to explain the derivation of the word infinitive, basically and most of the time it functions as a noun. And in that sense, it is very close to a gerund. In many cases, it is simply arbitrary. It's a matter of custom whether we use a gerund or an infinitive. And there are no grammatical rules to explain it. It simply is the way English evolved. For instance, after the word admits, you use a gerund. This just happens to be the way grammar developed. He admits to seeing little of her. Admits to seeing. And by convention, we use the gerund seeing after admits. But if you say professes, then you have to use an infinitive. He professes to see little of her. And that particular verb takes an infinitive. So essentially, an infinitive and a gerund are verbal nouns, somewhat different in form, but very similar to each other. The infinitive, which we're now on, most of the time takes the form of to, plus the word standing for the action. To run, to hit, to smell, etc. Now, as basically a verbal noun, an infinitive has some characteristics of a noun and some of a verb. As a noun, it can be the subject of a verb and the object of a verb. To err is human. What is the subject? To err, the infinitive to err. That's the case of an infinitive as the subject. He wanted to eat. What is the object of the verb wanted?
To eat.
To eat. There's an infinitive as the object of a verb. So like a noun, it can be subject or object. On the other hand, it has characteristics similar to those of a verb. For one thing, it can be modified by an adverb. To run quickly is good. There, quickly, the adverb modifies the infinitive to run. Also, like a verb, an infinitive itself can have a subject or object. For instance, look at number 1 on the sheet for this evening, lecture 5. I wanted him to cry. What now is the subject? What, first of all, is the infinitive in that sentence? I wanted him to cry. You see number 1 there? What is the infinitive? Hello. To cry. And who is it that is to be doing the crying? Who is to be the subject of the crying? Him. So this would be analyzed as him is the subject of the infinitive to cry. It's the subject of the infinitive to cry. So the analysis of a sentence like that would be, the main verb is wanted. The subject of that verb is I. And then, the whole object of what I wanted is him to cry, which itself breaks up into a subject and an infinitive. The subject being him, and the infinitive to cry. So there's a case of an infinitive, like a verb having a subject. So you have the funny construction of a noun, which is what the infinitive is, but being a verbal noun, it itself has a subject. Now that next sentence, to eat apples is good, is more obvious. To eat is the infinitive functioning as a noun, but it itself can take an object. To eat what? Apples. So an infinitive can be the subject or object, or have a subject or object. And that's because, you see, it's a mixture of a verb and a noun. Now, I mentioned that an infinitive is not always a noun, so just to give you an example, here's a sentence where it is not a noun. I have work to do. To do is the infinitive. What part of speech is it in that sentence? I have work to do. It tells me what kind of work. Therefore, it functions to modify a noun, and therefore it is, in that sentence, an adjective. And what about in this one? An apple is good to eat. Now, to eat there tells me good for what? Good in what way? It modifies the adjective, and a thing which modifies an adjective is an adverb. So in that sentence, it's an adverb. But typically, it functions as a noun, and that's what we will focus on. Now, I want just to point out to you here that the to form, like to eat, to swim, etc., is not invariable. There are many cases in English where you can have an infinitive without the word to when that word is understood or implied. There are many verbs that take an infinitive right after them without the to. For instance, I let him cry. Let goes right to the infinitive, and the way you know that is that there's another, more extended form which lets the to show up explicitly. And what would that be? I allowed him to cry, you see, and let simply condenses allowed to. And therefore the to is condensed into the verb, and therefore I let him cry. Cry in that sentence is an infinitive, even though the to doesn't apply. Generally speaking, when you have two different verbs right next to each other, like I let cry, the second is the infinitive form, because you can't have two different verbs to allow and to cry right in juxtaposition. Therefore, the second would be an infinitive. Or for instance, I made him eat. Now the main verb there is made. And eat there, which is the second verb, is an infinitive. And what is the alternative form which would reveal the to?
I forced him to eat.
I forced him to eat, or compelled him to eat. Or I dare say. See? And there the say is an infinitive, and the implication, the implicit word is I dared to say. You see. All right. Let's go now to the key thing with regard to the proper use of infinitives, which is tense. As a verbal, infinitives have tense in the same way participles and gerunds have tense. They also have voice. They can be active or passive. There are two main tenses, present and past, of an infinitive in English. So if the word is take, give me the present active infinitive. Present active. Present means now. Active, you're doing it. Would be to.
Have taken.
No, present tense. To take. Now give me the present passive. I want blank home. I want present passive.
To be taken.
To be taken. It's present passive infinitive. All right, now give it to me in the past, or you can also call it the perfect. I wanted, now give me perfect or past active. I wanted to have taken. And now make it perfect or past passive. So you have to put it in the past and make yourself the recipient. I wanted to have been taken. That's the perfect passive. Now, we do not have a future infinitive in English, although in many languages they do. And if you're translating Greek, for instance, you have a form of which all you can say in English is to be about to take, which is what they have one single word for that, which is a future infinitive, but English doesn't have it. I might also point out that there is a progressive infinitive. Remember progressive? Not just I ate, but I was eating. Not just I will eat, but I will be eating, to stress that it goes on and on. Well, we have progressive forms of the infinitive. What would the present progressive be? To
Be taken.
To be taking. And suppose you put that in the passive now. I want, then you want present, passive, progressive. To be,
Taken.
no, I want the progressive, the ing in there.
Taken.
To be taken is just the passive. I want the progressive to stress that it's going on and on. I want to be being taken. That's the present, passive, progressive. I don't know if it's much use to know that. And then there's the past progressive. To have been taking and to have been being taken. But it's very rare that you would find a sentence in English where it's worth uttering a mouthful like that. Now, the first main question about infinitives is when do you use which tense? And the rule for infinitives is the same as the rule for participles. You use the present infinitive when it refers to a time which is either the same as or later than the main verb. You use the present infinitive when it refers to a time which is either the same as or later than the main verb. You use the perfect infinitive when it's a time before that of the main verb. So most of the time, 99 times out of 100, I would venture to say, if you're in doubt, use the present infinitive. The perfect infinitive is for a very restricted situation when the time of the infinitive precedes that of the main verb. All the rest of the time you use the present. For instance, I like to eat. That's present infinitive because it's the same time as the like, right? I expect to spend my time in Florida. I expect now to spend tomorrow. It's going to take place in the future. It's still the present infinitive. I meant, I intended to do it. Intended is past, but the doing was going to be at the same time as the intending, so it's still the present infinitive. There's only one case when you use the perfect infinitive, and that is, I'll just wait for this siren. When the infinitive represents an action before the main verb. Now look at number 2. Now that first sentence indicates the proper use of the perfect infinitive. I would like to have lived in Aristotle's time. I would like now, you see, to have lived when? Thousands of years ago. So the living that I'm referring to is at a time far before the present liking. Therefore, I want to indicate, not that I want to live now, but I wish now that I had lived then, you see. And this is the one case where a perfect infinitive is appropriate. But if you look at the next sentence, I would have liked to live. The whole thing is in the past, and consequently, the infinitive is not a still earlier time, and consequently, it's the present infinitive. I would have liked then to live in Aristotle's time. So I would have liked in Aristotle's lifetime to live with him. Therefore, it's strictly the present infinitive. Now, the error is in the third of those sentences. This is a false construction. I would have liked to have lived, because the would have liked already puts it in the past. And by adding the to have lived, you're trying to get us to hold the past before the past in a construction which can't express that type of complexity. And therefore, this is the last sentence. There's no English use for such a sentence. You're trying to get two pasts, you see. Yeah.
Just a clarification. You mentioned past infinitive and perfect infinitive.
Same. Two words for the same thing. If you focus on the word have, you call it the perfect. But since there is no plain past infinitive, there's no way to form it in English without that auxiliary, it's the same as a past infinitive. It's the only way of referring to the non-present. So generally speaking, if you're in doubt about the tense of an infinitive, keep it present. Unless it's like the first of these in number 2, where it's unequivocal that the action of the infinitive is far before the action of the main verb. Now, there is one other topic that comes up with regard to infinitives beside their tense, and that is, should you split them or not? Which is a heatedly argued question in some circles, although it's not that big an issue as people make it. The concept of splitting in grammar is much broader than simply infinitives. Splitting consists of separating the elements of a unit, putting some word or phrase between the two parts of a grammatical unit. And in the case of an infinitive, what would it mean to split it? It's usually two words, to, and then run, eat, or whichever. So what would it mean to split it? Stick one or more words between the to and the verb form. To quickly eat, to in some way lose, etc. That's called splitting. Now, the best way to adjudicate this controversy is as follows. As a general rule, you should never split constructions. Never. Any kind of construction. That is, never break up a unit and stick something else in the middle. Why? Because English is what type of language? A distributive language. Therefore, we can't tell from the endings what goes with what. And therefore, we are geared to take together what appears together. And therefore, if two words form a unit, or several words form a unit, the only basic way we have of communicating that in English is to put them side by side. And therefore, as a general rule, we never separate units needlessly. Now, by unit, I mean any words that go together, for instance, subject and verb. Other things being equal, you should not separate, shouldn't split subject and verb. For instance, this is bad English. Jack yesterday hit the ball. There's no reason in the world to stick the adverb between the subject and the verb. And it'd be much better to say, yesterday Jack hit the ball, or Jack hit the ball yesterday. But Jack yesterday hit. Gratuitously, with no purpose, sticks an adverb between two elements of one grammatical construction. And therefore that's considered poor. Or, the building which he had late last spring turned over to the tenants was deteriorating. And there's a whole long thing between the building and the verb was deteriorating. Or, now here's a split infinitive. The golfer intended to in some way break the record. Now, to break is your infinitive. And there's no justification for sticking this whole phrase in, because you could easily say the golfer intended to break the record in some way. I wouldn't put it to break in some way the record, because then I'm going to split my object off from my infinitive. And the idea is the smoothest formulations in English are those which keep your essential units, subject, verb, object, unsplit. So you tuck your adverbs and your qualifiers insofar as you can unobtrusively around them. However, having said all this, I must say it is not an absolute that you never split a construction, because there are many cases where it's perfectly legitimate and in fact unavoidable to split a construction. Sometimes conciseness demands it, brevity. Sometimes you can save words. More important, sometimes clarity requires you to split a construction, even an infinitive. And in that case, you have to do it with impunity, because you have to put first things first. Now look at number 3, for instance. There, a split infinitive is mandatory. It frightened the girl to suddenly find herself in this position. What is the split infinitive? To find, and the splitting word is suddenly. Now, if you change the meaning of suddenly, you're going to change the meaning. Here, it's clear that the suddenly modifies the finding. But suppose I said it frightened the girl suddenly to find. I would right away have what kind of construction?
Pointing both ways.
Pointing both ways. That would be called a squinting construction. Did it frighten her suddenly, or the finding was sudden? Or if you put it on the other end, it frightened the girl to find herself suddenly in this position. Again, it squints, but is it suddenly being in this position or suddenly finding herself? And therefore, in this kind of construction, you have no choice but to split an infinitive, and that, in my opinion, it should be regarded as perfectly legitimate. That's how I would basically treat this issue of splitting. Don't do it unless there's a reason, but if there's a reason, do it with impunity. Do it, proudly, and that's it.
With conviction.
Now, I have one more rule to treat verbals in general. This applies to all verbals, whether participle, gerunds, or infinitives. And the rule very simply is do not dangle them. D-A-N-G-L-E. Do not dangle them. Now, an element is said to dangle. That's a technical word, D-A-N-G-L-E. An element is said to dangle when we cannot connect it immediately and unmistakably with the words to which it refers. An element dangles when you cannot connect it immediately and unmistakably with the words to which it refers. In other words, it's an element which you just leave hanging there and we don't know what to connect it with. And the result is it's taken in connection with the wrong words and makes hash of the thought. Now you can do this with virtually any element. We've already seen it, for instance, in connection with misplaced clauses. Remember, I think we had in the homework one week an example. There are thousands of thousands of boys with college educations that are out of work. Now that are out of work, dangle, because you meant it to apply to boys, and yet the way it was worded, it looks like it applies to education. That would be called a dangling clause, because the element in this case is a clause that are out of work. Now you can have the same type of error committed with verbals. You can have a dangling participle, a dangling gerund, or a dangling infinitive. Now if you look to number 4, you will see examples of these three. There is, first of all, watching the movie, the candy soon disappeared. Now, in this case, watching, functioning as an adjective, so that's a participle. But the way it's constructed, it makes it look like what is doing the watching? The candy. So this is a dangling participle. And how would you have to reconstruct this? Keeping the participial construction, but preventing the dangling. What would you have to say? Who has an idea? Somebody? All right, yes.
The candy disappeared as I was watching the movie.
All right, then you're giving up the participial construction. You're changing it to a clause. As I was watching the movie. You're putting a new subject in explicitly. See, I. But keep it, start the sentence watching the movie and redo it to prevent the dangling. Now you can't keep candy as the subject of the main clause once you do that. Yes?
Watching the movie, I made short work of the candy.
Okay. You'd have to make watching the movie, I or we or whoever polished off the candy. Or quickly ate the candy or something of that kind. In other words, the subject would have to be whatever it is that that participle actually modifies. Now, the next gives you an example of a dangling gerund. By polishing the silver, your table can be pretty. Now, polishing there is a gerund. Why? What's its grammatical function? It's the object of what?
Preposition.
The object of the preposition by, so it's a noun. By this activity. But the implication is who is doing the polishing, the way the sentence is constructed? The table. So that's a dangling gerund. And how would you rewrite that? Yes?
By polishing the silver, you can keep your table pretty.
Very good. Put the you as the subject. By polishing the silver, you can keep your table pretty. And then the last gives you a dangling infinitive. To see properly, eyeglasses must be clean. Now, the infinitive is to see. And what imply, the way it's constructed, it makes it look like the eyeglasses are seeing properly. So you would have to reword that what? To see properly?
You.
No, you couldn't. If you said to see properly, your eyeglasses must be clean, that still keeps eyeglasses the subject. The real subject is you, not your eyeglasses. So it would have to be?
You must keep your eyeglasses.
Yes, you must clean your eyeglasses, or you must keep them clean. And I will have a lot of examples of these dangling in the homework, but here is one that somebody gave me the last time I gave this quiz, which is perfect. In the New Yorker, You know, one of those announcements about I want information, and it says I should welcome information from any reader about the Leicester composer and musician Benjamin Burroughs, who died in 1966 to aid my research. That's a jagging infinitive, and the New Yorker comments they don't come that way anymore. So, all right, now that completes what we want to say about verbals. And now draw a line, and we're going to go to the last part of speech that we are investigating more or less thoroughly, and that is pronouns. Pronouns. Now, after we do pronouns, we'll have done conjunctions, verbs, including verbals and pronouns, and those are by far the three trickiest parts of speech. Nouns and adjectives and so on are a snap compared to the complexities of these three parts. Now, a pronoun, as you know, is a word used, pro or for, in place of a noun, a word that stands for a noun. And the noun for which it stands is called the antecedent. Now, what can a pronoun do? Well, since it stands in for a noun, it can do whatever a noun can do. It can be the subject of a sentence. I came. I is the pronoun. It can be the object. The boys hit him. Him is the object. It can be the indirect object. I gave him a letter. A letter to him. You see, that's the indirect object. It can be the object of a preposition. Above us, there was a silver moon. Us is the object of the preposition above. So in other words, it's a full-fledged substantive. It's a substitute for a noun. It represents a thing of some kind, person or thing, and it has all of the normal functions of a noun. Now, if you're interested, they usually present how do you know, or differentiate how many types of pronouns in English? Take a guess.
2.
More than 2. 7 is correct. Who said that? That's very good. 7 types of pronouns. So I'm going to run through first just to familiarize you with the types. Number 1, the most important really, is personal pronouns. That is to say, pronouns that refer to a person. And we have to add or thing because of the word it. And those are I, thou, he, she, it, we, you, they, etc. And of course, the main question in the proper use of personal pronouns is what's called case. When do you say I? When do you say me? When do you say he? When do you say him? Etc. We're going to turn to that later tonight. A second type of pronoun is called the compound personal pronoun. I don't think the names are too important here, but it'll give you a certain erudite quality to drop these names. These basically have the word self, S-E-L-F, added to the personal pronoun. Myself, yourself, himself, etc. Now let's say a word right here and get rid of compound personal pronouns. There are only 2 legitimate uses of these pronouns in English. One is as what's called reflexives. R-E-F-L-E-X-I-V-E-S, reflexives. And this basically takes place when the subject acts on himself. And the subject and object are the same person. Jack cut himself. If you just said Jack cut him, it would imply it's another person. But he cut himself. The self tells you the subject is both the subject and the receiver of the action. That's called a reflexive usage. It reflects back on the subject. It indicates the same subject and object. That's one use of the compound personal pronoun. The other use is an intensive. use. That's simply there a matter of stressing. That's all. For instance, who says that? I can simply say, I say it, or I myself say it. And the myself there is like a stronger form, a way of saying, I really mean me. I'm stressing the I. You see, that's all. It makes more intense or emphatic. Those are the only two basically legitimate uses of the compound personal pronoun. It is invalid in such uses as the following. I want this kept a secret between John and yourself. Now, yourself there is not reflexive. Doesn't refer back to the I. And it is not intensive. It's not between John and you yourself. Therefore, it's an affected or illegitimate use of this. And you should properly say simply, I want it kept a secret between John and you. Now, this error of using the intensive, using this compound form unjustifiably is most common when people use myself instead of I or me. They say, Bill and myself send our regards. When people actually write that way. That is very poor. One book comments that many people use myself because they feel that it is less, quote, personal and egotistical than I or me. And since they've had dinned into them, you shouldn't be selfish and you shouldn't use I and so on in your writing, they feel if I say myself, that disguises this sin of egoism. Well, it should be obvious, therefore, that at this point, grammar and philosophy unite, and that becomes a special reason, in my opinion, to use I or me, not to use myself or any of these weakened forms. All right, now the third type of pronoun, very, very, very important, is relative pronouns. In a way, trickier and more important than personal pronouns. The relative pronoun is a pronoun which has two functions at the same time. On the one hand, it refers to an antecedent, as the typical pronoun does. But secondly, and at the same time, it serves as a subordinating conjunction. In other words, it connects a subordinate clause with the main clause. Whenever a word has these two functions, that is by definition a relative pronoun. A pronoun which relates, you see, which conjoins. That's why it gets the name relative. Now, if you look at number 5, you will see the mysteries, what I hope are the mysteries clarified. The car that I bought was expensive. Now, the relative pronoun in this sentence is which word? That. Why is this a pronoun? What does it stand for? Car. It's short. Instead of having that, we could have had a language which says the car. The car I bought was expensive. But instead of repeating car, we have a word standing for the noun. That. And by definition, a word standing for a noun is a pronoun. How do you know that this is a pronoun? As a pronoun, it has to have some role in the grammar of the sentence. It has to be subject or object or whatever. In this case, that I bought, what is the role of the pronoun that? Is it subject or object? Of the clause that I bought. It can't be subject. What is the I then? I can't be the object. It's I bought that. So I is the subject, bought is the verb, and what is it that I bought? That, right? So that there is the object. Whenever you have a relative pronoun, it must be subject or object. It has to have some structure within the clause. And as a pronoun, it can't just hang there. So you have to be able to say what its function is. Why is that now a conjunction, that before I bought? Because it connects the clause I bought is a subordinate clause to the main clause, the car was expensive. So the that there is both a pronoun standing for car, functioning as the object of bought, and a conjunction. And that's the typical situation of a relative pronoun. Now look at the next one. The car that is on the street is mine. What is the relative pronoun? Here again it is that. What does it stand for? What's the antecedent?
The car.
Car. Now, is it subject or object in this clause that is on the street? In this case, it's the subject of is, right? And of course, again, it is a conjunction because it connects. The car which is on the street is mine. Yes.
I don't see why you can't view this as saying that I bought is an adjective modifying car.
Well,
That is on the street.
you're changing our subject. Certainly, the whole clause is an adjective clause. The whole clause is an adjective. Remember we discussed that clause's function, but we're analyzing the structure within the clause. Now, this is a point I tried to explain, I think, to you, Kathy, when you were sitting over here some weeks ago. And I did this deliberately because I asked you if you saw it, and you said you kind of didn't. This next sentence. In that sentence, the that is not a relative pronoun. The idea that man can lift a ton is absurd. Now that is not a relative pronoun. Now who can tell me why not? It is a pure conjunction. Why is it not a relative pronoun? You could say it refers to idea. Which idea? The idea that. But why is it not a pronoun?
That's inserted as subject or object.
Correct. I'm glad you said that, Kathy, because that was the point I tried to make without the example being written out that you said you didn't follow. So now you see that. It has no grammatical function as subject or object. It's not a substantive as it functions in that clause. It's simply a word, and we could have done without it. We could have put it in dashes because it said the idea man can lift a ton is absurd, you see. So here it is a pure conjunction. It is not a relative pronoun. The subject of that relative clause is, of that subordinate clause is man. The object is ton. You see? So don't assume whenever you see that you have a relative pronoun. Yeah.
Is it a test whether or not you can leave it out?
No, that's not a test because you could have left it out in the earlier one. Then you would have implied. I simply want you to see from here that is one of the most complicated words in all of grammar. It can be many, many things. You cannot assume it's a relative pronoun unless it functions as a pronoun in the clause and has a definite role as subject or object. But now understanding that, if you understand that, you know what a relative pronoun is. And the three big main relative pronouns are what? Remembering all of these can be other than relatives in different uses, but the three big ones are that is one, which is two, and who is three. What is another, if you want to throw that in, as, etc. But the big three are that, who, and which. Yes?
I still don't understand why that in the third sentence is not a pronoun. Well, it is.
Because it doesn't have any role in the structure of the clause, man can lift a ton. It's not the subject, it's not the object, it's not the object of a preposition.
Oh, I see.
It just hangs there, you see. So which means it's not functioning as a substantive that's integrated into the grammar. It simply is a hook time idea to man can lift a ton. And actually we would say that man can lift a ton is a noun clause. And what's its relation to idea? It's in apposition, that's all. It's one noun right after the other.
Question,
Yes?
what is the rule, or is there one determining whether you use that or you use which?
That's the perfect question, because my literal next sentence was, as I worded it here, was the important question is when do you use that and when do you use which? Of which I will say a few words at the end. Okay? So hold on till we get to the end, because that's the transition between pronouns and punctuation. And therefore I'm saving that as the transition subject. Yes?
Is there a rule for when you leave out that, when it is the object or something?
That is a tricky thing, which I would actually refer you to Fowler for. Basically speaking, the more formal the writing, the more you tend to put the that in. You wouldn't say the car I bought. The more informal, you take it out. You can drop it if the grammar is clear, you see. But there are many, many subtleties on that, and it verges into a stylistic thing. Fowler has pages on when you can omit the that and when you can't. And rather than try and summarize that off the top of my head, I would refer you to here. Now let us quickly finish off the list of pronouns. Was this essential?
Well, I don't know. What about an expletive? That wouldn't be considered an expletive in that sense.
No,
would it?
no, absolutely not. An expletive is an empty word to get the sentence going. This is a conjunction. Now let's polish off these last functions because the last types of pronouns are not nearly as important. The big two are personal and relative for practical purposes. Number 4 is what's called interrogative pronouns. In other words, a pronoun used to ask questions. What happened? Now, I see that's the same word what that you can use as a relative, only here you're using it to ask a question. Who did it? Who is a pronoun but used to ask a question. And I see that's not the same who as the boy who fell out the window. That's a relative who, the second. But who fell, question, is an interrogative who. Number 5. I don't have anything exciting to say about interrogatives. It's just self-evident. Number 5, demonstrative pronouns. To point out a specific entity. And there are really only 2. This and that, or the plural, these and those. I never saw that happen before. The that there points for something. It stands for some situation, some event, or whichever. But it's a pronoun in place of the noun. But you're pointing to something. I never saw that happen. I never heard this before. That's a demonstrative pronoun. Then 6, what's called indefinite pronouns. Now again, as a pronoun, this indefinite pronoun still refer to some entity, but they don't do it as definitely as a demonstrative or a personal pronoun. It's not he, this, so on. But it's some entity, but the pronoun doesn't uniquely specify it, so it's said to be indefinite. For instance, someone is in the lobby. Now, someone stands for some entity, but it's not this person, it's not you, it's somebody or other, you see. So that's called an indefinite pronoun. And there's a whole list of these indefinite pronouns. One, some, each, either, all, few, several, many, and others. Now, of course, you see that a lot of these words could be adjectives. If I say, many men are poor, many is what part of speech? An adjective. But I say, the principles we are learning apply to many of these cases. Many there is a pronoun. So whether they're an adjective or a pronoun depends on the use. Now, the only significant thing to say about indefinite pronouns right now, at least, is that you and they are not indefinite pronouns. They are personal pronouns. And it's considered poor English to use them as indefinite. This would be an example. She is the kind of woman who flirts with you. Now, there you mean who flirts with anybody, with people. You see, only you're using the personal pronoun for an indefinite reference, which is incorrect because you're making it sound like she flirts with you specifically. That's a use of the personal instead of the indefinite, and that's wrong. You should say who flirts with people. Or people say in Europe they pay higher prices. Now the they is a personal pronoun, and if you mean people in general, whichever you have to say. Europeans pay higher prices, or people, or whichever. And now, just for completeness, there is at number 7 the so-called reciprocal pronoun for mutual action or relationship. And that's really each other or one another. The boys hit each other. That has really no significance. All right, now let us turn to a few of the big questions with regard to the use of pronouns. Now, the first main issue that I want to discuss with regard to pronouns is case, C-A-S-E. This applies above all with personal and relative pronouns. Personal and relative pronouns, basically. Now, first I want to tell you what case means. Case is inflections applied to substantives. Inflections applied to substantives. That is, by substantive nouns or pronouns. And inflections, as you know, means changes in the word form to indicate its role in the sentence. So whenever you change a noun or pronoun's form to indicate its function, that's said to be a change of case. Now, for instance, I like the girl likes me. Both pertain to liking and relate the same two people. But in one case, I is used because that is the subject form. In one case, me is used because me is the object form. The difference between I and me is simply a difference of case. It's the same word, but one is in the form to indicate subject, one is in the form to indicate object. Now, the classic languages, Latin, Greek, etc., have a whole set of different case endings to indicate different functions. And if you learn a noun like servus, which is Latin for servant, you learn like what? A dozen endings. Servus, subject. Servat, that's the vocative. You say, oh, servant, come here. You call him, you put an E on. Servum, the object. Servi, the possessive. It belongs, it's the book of the servant. I gave it to the servant, indirect object, servo, etc. And then you have the whole thing again in the plural. Servi, servi, servo, servorum, servis, servis. And you learn, you get the serve and you put all these different endings on to indicate its function. Now, in English, case has basically died out with regard to nouns. What takes its place? Word order. That's the distributive language. So we tell subject and object mainly by position. And if there's a special function like indirect object or whichever we do it by, a little word. We gave it to the girl, the book of the boy. Those little words are prepositions and we basically establish it by that means. There's really only one case left for nouns in English. And what case is that? Possessive, the possessive case. And what is the case ending of the possessive in English? Apostrophe S, right. Jack's book. That's the only remnant left of case in English for nouns. Even there, it's fading out. You may or may not know that the possessive ending is considered wrong for anything inanimate. Since it designates ownership, it applies only like to basically to a person, Jack's book. But this is considered bad. The room's length. They're supposed to say the length of the room, or the rug's color is bad because it's not strictly speaking possession. So there's almost no case ending even for the possessive except in the one case of human beings. The last home of case in English is pronouns. And basically personal pronouns and one relative, because that and which have no cases. Which relative has a case? Who? Now, how many cases are there in English? Latin has 6. How many are there in English, even where we have cases? 3. The subject case, which is called subjective case, although I prefer the word nominative, but that's from classical languages. We call it the subjective case. It has nothing to do with being subjective, of course, in the philosophic. It just means the case of the subject. Then the case for the object, which is called the objective case. And then there's the possessive case. So for instance, if we take the first person pronoun, subjective would be I. Objective, me. Possessive, my or mine. Now, take the third person. Subjective, masculine. He. Objective, him. Possessive, his. Third, feminine. She, her, and then her or hers. First person plural. We, us, our or ours. Third person. They, them, their or theirs. Now, what about second person? Only two cases there. Subject and object are both you. That's why nobody gets them wrong. And then the your or yours for the possessive. What about third person neuter? It. Now here the subject and object are the same, it, but the thing that gets everybody wrong is the possessive. That everybody gets wrong is the possessive. How do you spell the possessive of it? I-T-S. Now what you see mixes up everybody is there's two uses of the apostrophe in English. One is for possession, like Jack's book, apostrophe S. The other is for omission, like we don't like it. And we put the apostrophe in place of the O in the not, D-O-N apostrophe T. So everybody thinks if it's the possessive of its, it must be I-T apostrophe S. But it happens that in English, the possessive has no apostrophe, and the actual I-T apostrophe S indicates omission. It is, see? And therefore everybody is permanently and hopelessly confused and gets I-T apostrophe S and I-T-S mixed up. I-T apostrophe S means it is. I-T-S is the one case where the possessive does not take the apostrophe. Now, the main thing, the rule here is simply use the right case for your pronouns. That's all. Very straightforward. All you have to do is use the right case. If it's the subject, you have to use the subjective case. He and I travel together. He is the subject, I is the subject, you use the subjective case. What about this? It was she who paid. She is what? No, sir. There's no object after the verb to be. Verb to be doesn't indicate action, but state. Therefore, the rule is the verb to be takes the same case on both sides. Right? Same case on both sides because there's no action. So you're in the same condition on one side as on the other. You can think of it like an equal sign. So it was she. What comes after it is the same as before, and therefore you say she, right? Subjective case. Who paid? Why is who rather than whom paid? Subject of paid, right? Okay. Yes. Who is subject and whom is object? Now here's some cases of the objective case. The men already knew him. Why is that the objective case? Direct object of knew. Give them our regard. Why is them the objective case? Indirect object of give. Give to them. The job was hard for us. Why is it us? Object of the preposition. Now get this one. They did not expect us to entertain. Why is it us? They did not expect us to entertain. Why is it us? You wouldn't say they did not expect we to entertain, and yet we are doing the entertaining, and yet you automatically say us. Now why is that? Because there's a rule in English, which is what?
Well, us is the us being modified by to entertain, which is an adjective.
Well, no, to entertain there is an infinitive.
Oh, I don't know.
Well, the rule is us is the subject of the infinitive, right? Remember we had the example, I wanted him to cry, that him was the subject of the infinitive. Well, they didn't expect us to entertain. Us is the subject of the infinitive. The subject of the infinitive is always in the objective case. The subject of an infinitive is in the objective case. The reason is, even though it's the subject, it comes after a verb like expect. They didn't expect us, and the expect throws it into the objective case, you see. Now, I'll give you a sentence without the last word, and you tell me which one it should be and why. Did you take him to be I or me? Did you take him to be I or me? How many say I? How many say me? Me is correct. Why is me correct? What's the subject of that infinitive, to be? Did you take him to be?
Him.
Him is the subject. What is the rule with regard to the verb to be? Same case on both sides. So if it's him on one side, it has to be me on the other side. You'll get more evidence of more examples of that soon. The whole trick with regard to pronouns is to understand the grammatical function of your pronoun. Then you'll have no problem using the right case. Now, I'm going to give you, I won't exactly dignify it by saying rules, but 3 helpful hints with regard to the case of pronouns. Number 1 is the fallacy that I call, this is my own name for it, so you don't have to learn this name, but it's a name something. The fearful subjective. And it arises as follows. This is a person who is drilled over and over, and you must say, it is I. You know, and he says it is me, and has beat into it. You have to say it is I, it is he, it is she, etc. He feels that that's wrong, but he's drilled in it. And he finally reaches the conclusion that when you want to be grammatical, you always suppress me, us, him, etc., and go right to the subjective case. In other words, this is the type of person who feels that grammar is basically his enemy. In the same way as some people think ethics is their enemy, and if something is enjoyable, it must be wrong, this person thinks grammar is the enemy, and therefore if it sounds right, it must be wrong. Therefore, he is frightened into using this subjective case simply because it doesn't seem right to him. That's what I call the fearful subjective. It's like a little learning is a dangerous thing. If he went by his instinct, he would be more grammatical. Don't assume that the subjective is always right. There are many cases where me, him, etc. is required. Now look at number 6. This money belongs only to you and I. Now this person has had beat into him. You must end a sentence with I. It is I. Only in this case, it's got that construction. What governs the construction there? To you and me. It's the object of the preposition to, so it must be me. Look at the next one. Everyone but Tom and he. Now what's wrong with the he there? Why does it have to be him? Yes.
It's the object of, I was going to say, but as a preposition.
Yes, in that sentence, but is a preposition. The object of the preposition but. Everyone entered, but Tom and but him, you see. So this is a phony subjective. Well, now look at the next one. A group of wee girls. Now, the subject is a group went shopping. The clause is of us. A group of us went shopping. You'd never say a group of we went shopping, right? What is girls function there? Who knows? Girls has a very definite grammatical role there. There's 2 in a row. Us and girls. 2 substances. So what does that make girls?
In a positive?
Positive, right. So the grammar has to be a group of us, i.e. girls, went shopping yesterday. So that we is entirely wrong in all those cases.
But that sentence is grammatical.
With the us, it's
Yeah.
grammatical. With the we, it's entirely wrong. Yes.
So is it objective? It's an object?
It's the object of the preposition of. Has to be us. A group of us. All right. And if the sentence were simply, we girls went shopping, then it would be we, because that's the subject. Now, point 2 is the other side, what I call the fearful object. This is all the case where the person was drilled, you have to use whom. Whom did you marry? And they end up feeling you got to say the objective case even when it's wrong. Now, typically this takes place with the use of what's called parenthetical remarks. Now look at number 7. 2 and 2 I know is 4. What is the role of I know in regard to the grammar in that sentence? What is the role of I know? Is that, does I know there, is 2 and 2 the object of I know? Is it like I come in here and say I know 2 and 2? No. Yes.
It's the main clause.
It has no grammatical role at all. It's a side remark. It's a side issue. It's a parenthesis. It's like the main clause here is 2 and 2 is 4. And I know is just a little fillip to say this is a thought running through my mind. This is something I believe. But that is not the essence of the sentence. And that would be true if I said he says we may believe. Any of these little phrases stuck in like that are called parenthetical remarks or asides. They're not part of the grammar. They do not have any reference, therefore, to what the right case is. Case is determined by the main thought. 2 and 2 is 4. Now you'll see the relevance of this in the next. O. Henry is a writer whom I think will be read for centuries. Now the whom there is wrong. Why?
It's not an object.
It's not an object. The actual sentence is, O. Henry is a writer who will be read. It's the subject of will be read. What is the status of I think there? That's a parenthetical remark. It's not the object of whom. See, whereas if I said, O. Henry is a writer whom I think well of, then you could say that's the object. But here, I think is just a side remark, even though there's no commas around it. And consequently, you have to go by the main grammar. So the whom is wrong. Now
Should
look
it
at-
have commas around it?
No, it absolutely should not. There's a rule in grammar that parenthetical asides like this do not require a comma, and in most cases a comma would be wrong. Yes?
Could you just explain how who functions as a subject here?
Well, what is the subject of will be read?
Oh, Henry.
No. Subject is not O. Henry. Subject is who. Who stands for O. Henry? O. Henry is the subject of the verb is. O. Henry is. A writer is then the complement. And then, what else do I say about O. Henry? O. Henry is the guy who, subject, verb will be read. That's a passive verb. Future passive. Now look at the, yes,
On the first one there, 2 and 2 is 4.
yeah.
Why is that is and not are?
Because you're taking it as one unit. Not 2 plus 2, but the sum of 2 and 2 by implication. I'll get to that in a few minutes when we get to number 10. I want to look at who or whom shall I say is calling. Now, who or whom, which is it? Which is correct? Whom. Who is calling? It's the subject of is. What is the status of shall I say? Parenthetical remark. Parenthetical statement. So it's who is not the object of I shall say. It is the subject of is calling. Now if you understand that, you will not misuse the objective and you won't be thrown off by parenthetical remarks. Now, the third rule with regard to case is the case of a pronoun is determined by its use in its own clause. The case of a pronoun is determined by its use in its own clause. Now this applies when we have a pronoun in a subordinate clause. For instance, look at number 8. He will find who or whomever wastes time. Now should it be whoever or whomever? How many say who? Who? Without the F. How many say whom with the F? That is wrong. It's a who without the F. Why? What is the object of find? What is the object of find? Is it the word whomever? If it were, it would be then, he will find whomever. But that's not the sentence. What is the object of find?
Whoever wastes time.
The whole clause, whoever wastes time, is the object. Now within that clause, what is the subject of wastes? Whoever. And therefore it has to be the subjective case. The pronoun gets the case that is required in its own clause. And now look at the second part. And whomever he hates. Now this case it would have to be whomever. Again, the whole object is whomever he hates. But within that clause, what is the status of whomever? Object of hates. Right. Now what would you do with the next one? He has respect for. Now is it whoever or whomever? Whom is wrong. The preposition governing this clause is for. The entire clause is the object of for. But now within the clause, what is the subject? Whoever. So he has respect for whoever has money. In other words, the case is determined by its use in its own clause. All I can do is repeat it. When you have a construction like this, the entire clause is the object of for. The object is not the word whoever. The object is whoever has money. For, he has respect for whoever has money. Now the structure of whoever has money, that depends whether you use who or whom on whether it's subject or object. What is the subject of has? Whoever. It's a subject. So it has to be whoever. Yes.
What is the object in that sentence?
Money. Within the subordinate clause, you mean?
For respect, has respect.
The object of what?
What is the object of the verb? Oh, has.
Has is
respected.
the subject and respect is the object. Tells what he has. Right? Okay. There's two objects here of the main clause and the subordinate clause. Money is the object of the has and the subordinate clause. Now, let us go to one other feature before our break of pronouns. We've talked about case. Nothing will make this fully clear except repeated drills. If we had a month of 1,000 exercises, we'd get it completely. But try and retain the main theory for those of you who look Babel, and then we'll go over some exercises next time. I want to turn now to one other feature besides case, and that is number, singular or plural. A pronoun must agree in number with its antecedent. You can't say, for instance, the boys didn't like its coats. You have to say their coats, right? Because it's plural. Now here again, I want to give you just a few hints. In this case, 2 hints. One applies to indefinite pronouns. Remember those each, some, many, and so on. And the hint here is this. Many of these indefinite pronouns are singular, even though they may feel like they are plural. Many of them are singular, even though they may feel as if they're plural. For instance, each. Each of these books, would you say, is or are rare? Is rare. Why? Because each means each one. This one, this one, this one. And when one is the subject, it is singular. Now, many people think each of these books is synonymous with all the books. You see, in which case, they have the feeling of plural and they say they are. That, however, is strictly speaking incorrect. Each of the following is singular. Each, either, neither, anyone, someone, anybody, everybody, everybody, you see, is. Everything, nobody, no one, nothing, no thing is. And it applies both to verb and to pronoun. For instance, each is means the verb has to be singular. But what about everyone has their own hobby?
His.
Has to be his own, or if you're a women's liber, his or her own. But it can't be there because everyone is singular. Now, we can, however, say that there are some of these indefinite pronouns where it depends on the context. They have lost the strict singularity, and you can use them as singular or plural. For instance, none. Now, none is not the same as no one. None has lost the feeling of one, although originally it came from no one, but it dropped out that feeling. So this you can now say in English. None is so blind as he who will not see, or none are so blind as they who will not see. And the context depends. And this is true, for instance, for any, all, more, most, etc. If you're focusing on an individual unit, they're singular. If you're focusing on a plurality, many together, it's a plural. For instance, all is lost, where the all is short for everything, or stands for the idea of everything. But you say, how many battles did you lose? All of them are lost, where it's a collection. A plurality, then it's a plural. Now, one last rule about number in regard to pronoun. Really not a rule so much as a hint. Your relative pronoun has to agree with its antecedent as singular or plural. But you have to be sure you know what the antecedent is. Be sure you know the antecedent of your relative pronouns. In other words, your relative has to agree in number with the real antecedent. Now look at number 9. Plato is among the Greeks who have influenced mankind. Why is it have influenced rather than has influenced? Why have rather than has? Why plural?
Refers to among the Greeks, not
It
Plato.
refers to Greeks. That's the antecedent. And the thought is Plato is among the following group. Greeks who have influence. So Greeks is the antecedent of the who. And therefore the have has to be plural. Now look at the next sentence. Plato is the only one of the Greeks who has written. Because here, what is the antecedent of who? One. The only one who has written. And of the Greeks, it just tells you one of what group. Now, a lot of people will get those wrong because they'll think Plato was the antecedent in the first and Greeks in the second. You have to analyze your sentence so you know what is the real antecedent, and then it has to agree in number. Now, just in concluding this topic of agreement in number, let's for a moment step outside of pronouns and look at nouns. Case has gone with regard to nouns, but number remains. And your noun has to agree with the verb in number. Now, in most cases, this is obvious. The boys are, the boy is, etc. But there are some tricky singulars and plurals, and I've condensed the most tricky ones into number 10. There's a whole bunch of wrong uses in number 10. A list, etc., of many books in addition to thousands of phonograph records have been given to the public library. What is the subject of that sentence? One word.
List.
List. Singular or plural?
Singular.
Therefore, it has to be has been given. What is the status of many books? That's a prepositional phrase. What type of part of speech? Adjective, right? And therefore, it has nothing to do with the subject. It does not determine the grammar. Even though the books is plural, of many books is simply a modifier. The subject is list, yes.
Is there any rule that two things that you're putting together like that, the list of books and the thousands of phonograph records, both have to have the same number to be grammatic? Or do you need to rephrase it so that they are both?
Well, what would you mean by that?
The list of the books, and in addition, a collection of thousands of phonograph records.
No, there's no rule that you have to use the same number, but the rule here is there's a big difference between and all the other phrases you can use to bring in a further subject. If I say a list and a leash, if ever you would use that, you'd have to say have been given, because the and, remember, is a pure conjunction. There's no subordination. It combines the two and makes a plural. But if I say a list in addition to thousands, the in addition is like a subordinate. You see, it's not a pure and therefore it's a side issue. It doesn't affect the grammar, you see. And therefore there's a whole bunch of these like weak conjunctions that do not therefore take a plural verb. Here's a list of them, if I can find. This is already going into copybook, but for instance, including, along with, together with, in addition to, as well as, no less than, etc. All of those are exactly as in addition to here. They do not make it plural. So it would have to be a list, etc. has been given. Now, the next rule is the staff has or have. Now this is what's referred to as a collective noun. Do you use a singular or a plural with a collective noun, like a whole group, the state, the jury, the staff, etc.? Depends is the answer. If you're thinking of the staff as one entity acting together, then you use singular. If you're thinking of it as a group of individuals with their own separate processes, you use plural. In this case, we're saying the staff has conflicting opinions. So by the very nature of it, we're not thinking of it as a unitary entity, but as a group of individuals. So you'd have to say have. And now, the last tricky thing, the one thing I myself do not like are. And what throws you into the are, the copula, or the complement rather, is plural, right? The one thing are the obscenities. But the verb has to agree with the subject, not the complement. Therefore, if you said this strictly, it would have to be the one thing I myself do not like is the obscenities. Now that grates on a lot of people's ears, because we have so ingrained in us the idea of the verb to be has to be the same on both sides. So a singular on one side and a plural on the other bothers you. Therefore, many books suggest reconstruct it and just simply say, I do not like the obscenities in these books. But if you're going to keep the one thing, you have no choice but to make it the is. All right, let's take a break here, and then we'll have one last rule about pronouns. Now, we have discussed various rules about pronouns so far. You basically use the right type of pronoun, the right case, the right number. And there's one last rule, which is the most important. The referent or antecedent of a pronoun must be unmistakable. The referent or antecedent of a pronoun must be unmistakable. You have to know what it stands for. This is more important than all the rules of case and number put together, because this goes to clarity of thought. A pronoun is always a substitute, a stand-in. and you have to know what it substitutes for. If your referent is vague or ambiguous or unclear, you wipe out the whole function of the pronoun. Now there are some sentences where the way it's constructed, you can't tell what the pronoun stands for. In that case, you have to rewrite the sentence or give up the use of a pronoun. Use a noun which is clear. Now I'm going to give you 5 types of case where the pronoun is unclear, where you can't tell what it stands for. All of these are wrong. Some are worse than others. First of all, sentences where there is more than one possible antecedent. More than one possible antecedent for your pronoun. So therefore we can't tell which it stands for. Look at number 11. Bill warned his uncle that he would be leaving on Tuesday. He is a pronoun. What does it stand for? Bill or uncle? You have no way to know. There are 2 possible antecedents here. That is therefore a violation of this rule. Now, it is not considered good English to correct this rule by putting a parenthesis after it, such as Bill warned his uncle that he, parenthesis Bill, would be leaving on Tuesday. That amounts to saying I could not construct an unambiguous sentence, so I have to put a little footnote in to say by my pronoun I mean so-and-so. And if you have to say it that way, you may as well leave out the he and just say Bill warned his uncle that Bill would be leaving on Tuesday. There's no use throwing the he in. Much better, of course, would be to reconstruct it so it's unambiguous. Who could think how to do that? Bill said to his uncle, comma, quote, you will be leaving on Tuesday, period, close quote. For instance, then it's unequivocal. You made it in direct discourse, or there's other possibilities. Now, a particular type of, within this first rule, that is where there's many possible references, is what is called a remote reference. Remote reference. This is part of the first rule. Remote reference. And this really means your pronoun is so far from the noun that you have you can no longer remember which noun it is that it stands for. Look at the next little passage under 11. He sat by the window all day and worked steadily at his editing of the magazine that had been lying on the corner table. It was too small to give much light. It. What does it stand for? Obviously from the content, the window. Oh. But in we've had day, editing, magazine, table. So by now there are so many intervening nouns that it's completely unclear to which it refers. That is an example of remote reference. Window is remote from it. And in a case like this, there's no justification for using a pronoun. What should you do in that it was too small? The window. You have to repeat the noun, that's all. Or else you have to say, having worked steadily, etc., he sat by the window which was too small. Put it right next to window. All right, that's rule 1. Rule 2. Be careful of broad, B-R-O-A-D, reference. Be careful of broad reference. By broad reference here we mean a pronoun standing for an entire clause as opposed to one specific noun. A pronoun standing for an entire clause rather than simply one specific noun. Look at number 12. Babe Ruth was hitless during the game, which caused much comment. Now the which there is ambiguous. Why? It could mean simply the game. There was a lot of comment about the game, in which case its referent would be the single noun game. But more likely it means what? The whole broad idea is stated in the clause, he was hitless during the game. And that fact caused much comment, in which case is what's called broad reference. The reference is to the entire clause. The fact that he was hitless during the game is what caused much comment. Now a construction like this is, you see, inherently ambiguous because you can't tell whether the pronoun, in this case the which, stands for the last noun, game, or the entire broad clause. And therefore you have to be wary of this type of reference. Sometimes the structure of the sentence makes clear which it is. Look at the next one. I intend to repeat that Babe Ruth was hitless during the game, comma, which many men attended. Now the which there from the content couldn't mean the fact that he was hitless during the game. And therefore it has to mean simply game. And therefore that's perfectly clear. If your grammar makes clear which it is, there's no problem. But if it's ambiguous, you have to, of course, redo it. Now, sometimes broad reference is so broad that you don't even know to what it could conceivably apply. There are many possibilities. Look at this next sentence. In 12. Echo loved Narcissus, but he loved himself even more. This is true in real life too. Now that is a typical way that students write. That is a perfect example of student writing. And what is the pronoun with broad reference there? This. Demonstrative pronoun. It's supposed to stand for something specific. What in the world does it stand for? Well, presumably some kind of idea earlier stated. But is it unrequited love? Is it male chauvinism? Is it narcissism? What is it that the this stands for? This, you see, is not only an example of poor use of pronouns. This is basically poor thinking. Bad thinking. It's sloppy use of a term without any idea what exactly the point is. And this is one of the most crucial issues of the use of pronouns. When you get a pronoun with this type of sloppiness, it means the person is not clear in his own mind what the actual thought is he's communicating, and he uses a pronoun as a filler. And the actual meaning in that sense would be something like, some part or all of what I earlier said applies elsewhere, but I haven't figured out which. And that's what they do. They just throw a this or that. Now, sometimes the grammar makes clear what the preceding reference is, and there's no ambiguity. We were asked to remove our coats, which we did happen. Now that which refers to what? Our coats? Obviously not. It refers to the whole broad act of removing our coats, and that is clear from the structure. So the general rule is a broad reference is fine if it's unmistakable. But a broad reference is unacceptable if it's ambiguous and you can't tell which reference it is. Yes.
Well, okay, you're saying that the last one is okay, even though you can't point out a particular thing that the which refers to?
You can point out the particular thing it refers to is the state of removing our coats.
Okay, even though you're not saying removing the coats, it's implicit.
You are saying it, you're implying it. A broad reference is this is the point. Broad reference is not per se a phallus. It is a legitimate, valuable use of pronouns if it is unambiguous. If it's clear that it is broad reference and not the preceding, not just a single noun, and you know exactly what the broad reference is. And this last sentence there, we were asked to remove our coats. I put that in deliberately to show you that broad reference is not per se a phallus. But you have to beware when you're using pronouns. You have to know that this type of ambiguity is possible and be prepared to use them only with clear reference. Those are the two, here's an example from, good examples of all these fallacies are in the, the Columbia Journalism Review. The last page, if you've seen the inside last page, they have all these examples of ungrammatical speech taken from actual newspapers. And here's one from the White Plains newspaper, which I quote exactly as quoted. Police said they had to bring him to the ground twice before they confiscated the pistol from a pants leg. I would describe it as hairy, said Sergeant Liberty. So who wrestled with the suspect? Now you see the it there, it's not the pants leg, it's the whole situation. That's a broad reference, which is ambiguous because it sounds like it's a specific noun. Now, the next few rules are less crucial than the ones we've discussed, but just to round out the list. 3. Pronouns with no antecedent at all are wrong. A pronoun has to stand for something. For instance, it says in my book. Now that's not the it of it is raining. That implies something says, but what says? The author says what? So that's unacceptable. Or, they have this great chef at the restaurant. This, which, there's no reference for that. So you simply should say they have a great chef. If it's this, it has to be in the context of pointing out a specific reference. Number 4, a variant number 3. Pronouns where the antecedent is merely implied but not expressed are unacceptable. Pronouns where the antecedent is implied but unexpressed are wrong. For instance, my mother is a music teacher. It is a profession I hate. Now, it stands for what? Teaching music, but that hasn't been stated. All that's been stated is music teacher. So that's a pronoun where the antecedent is merely applied. And if you want to utter that thought, you have to say, my mother teaches music. Teaching music is a profession I hate. Or, my mother's profession is teaching music, which I hate. And now finally, a rule of caution. Watch out for the same pronoun with different antecedents in the same sentence. Watch out for the same pronoun with different antecedents in the same sentence. And here the outstanding culprit is the word it, it. As a general rule, one it per sentence. It should be clear what it stands for. Now look at 13. Although it is cool by the lake, it looks full of swimmers. What is the first it? That's the it of it is raining, you know. The weather it, you can call it. What is the second it? It looks. That's the personal pronoun look standing for?
Lake.
Now that is the same pronoun, it. All right, those two its have different uses, and if we got rid of them, the sentence would be something like, although the day is cool by the lake looks full of swimmers. But by using the same it with different antecedents, we are losing the sense of what our antecedent is. Take this example. We should have studied for the exams last night. It is too late to do it now. It is too late to do it. Poor. Now who could recast that and get rid of both its? The essence of this type of editing is sweep out all those its. It's a special skill to reduce your its. Who can take it is too late to do it now and get rid of both those its?
Now it's too late.
Well, now is too late, or there is no time now. You don't have to keep the same word late. But it is, and to do it is two different references. Now, in all these cases, when you have an ambiguous pronoun, you either reconstruct your sentence, get rid of a pronoun and state the noun flatly, or move it so that it's right next to the noun it stands for, so you can't possibly misinterpret. There are exercises on this in the home. Now, I have one last topic to touch on, and then we'll have finished the theory of pronouns. Here again, we had a long evening, and I had some bitter complaints going too fast. All I can say, I'm trying to condense a lot of material, maybe too much material, but this last topic I have to at least touch on, and that is which, that, who. The question that was asked earlier, the relative pronouns. When do you use which? Do you say the man which I saw? The man whom I saw? The man that I saw? That's the big question. Are you answering this question? No. This is a rhetorical question, which has many, many pages in the Fowler, which I'm going to just hit a few high points. Point one, broadly speaking, that means that there are many exceptions. Broadly speaking, who is for persons, which is for things, that is for anything, or both. That is the safe one. The boy who was walking. The book which fell. You wouldn't say the book who fell. And then the boy that came, the book that fell. Okay? Now, the nuances of these are a whole world in itself. For instance, Fowler points out that the more you want to stress the humanity, the human character of your entity, the more you must use who. The more it becomes a type, an unknown person, an institution, etc. You can go to that and even which for human beings. For instance, you can't, he says, say the ladies that were present. Because here you must be courteous from the nature of the context. And to say the ladies that suggests to us not so important that they're real human beings. You have to say the ladies who were present. Or you can't say the general that most distinguished himself, because here you're paying deference and homage to the general, so you have to give him his full human character, the general who. But when we get to more indefinite human reference, the that becomes acceptable. The most honest critic that can be found. I don't know who it is even, you see, but we don't have to stress his human character, so we can go into the that reference. Anybody that knows anything. It's an indefinite reference, but that is okay. And now to get the extreme here, when you take human beings but treat them as a mechanical institution, you can go right to the which. The jury which reached the verdict did so and so, you see. So one scale of who, that, which is how human are they? How much are you focusing on their humanity? The more you do it, the more you have to approach the who. Now, needless to say, you must be consistent. There is no excuse for using who and then that in the same sentence. The man who was in the room and that read the book is completely unacceptable. Whatever one you use, you have to be consistent. Now this, however, is more or less just an introduction to the subject, because the big question is not so much when to use who, as when to use that and which. Now, the answer is there's a simple rule which people don't follow. But they don't follow it on so large a scale that you can't even really say it's a rule. So I simply agree with Fowler. It would be nice if people followed this rule, but there are even considerations why I don't follow it all the time myself. But having said that, and leaving out the nuances, look at number 14. Let's distinguish two types of relative clauses, and then we can easily give you a rule which will hold in most cases. Take the grand number 14. Grand pianos which are uncommon are necessary to modern orchestras. Grand pianos which are out of tune are a performer's nightmare. Now there is an essential difference between these two statements. They both have grand pianos are something. They each have a relative clause. What's the relative clause in the first? Just the relative clause. Which are uncommon. What's the relative clause in the second? Just the relative clause. Which are out of tune. So the main clause in the first is grand pianos are necessary. The main clause in the second is grand pianos are a nightmare. Now the question is, do you see that there is an essential difference in the relation between the relative clause and the noun piano in these two cases? An essential difference. And if you can get this difference, you not only get the that and which distinction, you'll have one big foot in the door in the proper use of commas, which is our topic next time. Now, I see a lot of people's hands raised. This is a delicate point. If you get it right, that's fine. If you get it wrong, you will collapse the understanding of the whole class. So if you think for sure you know what you're saying, I will take a volunteer. You're going to tell us the difference. Okay. Yes.
In the first sentence, the clause is not absolutely necessary, i.e.
Okay,
You
that's
say the
good.
same thing without it.
Yes. In the first sentence, the clause, which are uncommon, is in the nature of an aside. It is not essential to the thought. It's a sideline, a side remark. Your real thought is grand pianos are necessary to modern orchestras. And you say, by the way, there's another thing about grand pianos, they're uncommon. But even if you didn't add that, by the way, your main thought is unimpaired. But if you leave it out the second time, then what would your main thought be? Grand pianos are a performer's nightmare, per se by their nature. And then you would be saying, and by the way, they're out of tune, which is ridiculous. You don't believe that at all. You're not saying grand pianos are a nightmare, and by the way, they're out of tune. You're saying one special type of grand piano, namely what? A grand piano that is out of tune, right? Now, these two types of clause, one is an aside, the other is essential to the subject, are called as follows. The first is called a non-restrictive clause, which are uncommon, is a non-restrictive relative clause. Non-restrictive. Or put it another way, non-defining. The second is called a restrictive or defining relative clause. It is essential to specifying the subject. If you omitted it, you would destroy the whole thought. It's integral to the subject. It's called restrictive because it restricts the subject. It's not grand pianos, but grand pianos which are out of tune, you see, which is the nightmare. Whereas in the first, it's simply grand pianos which are necessary. You got that? Now, if you grasp this difference, and this is a very important difference in making your thought clear, Fowler suggests very simply this. Which should be used for non-restrictive and that for restrictive. In other words, the first is correct and the second is wrong. The second should be grand pianos that are out of tune are a performer's nightmare. He says and he makes a very plausible case. We have these two relative pronouns. We may as well separate and make which the sign, that this is an aside. Notice that you always have a comma before the which in this use. And use that when you want to run it right in as one restrictive clause. So the second should be grand pianos that are out of tune. Now, there are reasons why this use is not always adhered to and can't always be adhered to. We can look at some of those perhaps later. I don't want to confuse you at this stage of the game. But as a general rule, we're going to be looking at restrictive and non-restrictive clauses next time more fully to discuss commas. Because you see, one rule is, of commas, is that a non-restrictive clause must be set off in commas. And a restrictive clause cannot be set off in commas. We'll discuss that next time. But if we had that comma rule and combined it with which and that used appropriately, it would always be clear what our thought was. So that's the best I can give you in a brief discussion of when to use which and when to use that. This will, however, be much clearer when we discuss these types of clauses more fully in connection with commas. So let's leave it at this point now and turn to the homework from Lecture 4. And I'll simply assign all of these examples from Lecture 5 for next time.
Leonard?
Yes.
The idea of the using that in the case of the restrictive is that you're specifying that particular thing.
That's right.
You're delimiting it, whereas which doesn't imply specifying, I mean, that case rather than another.
That is his point, yeah. He's very eloquent on this, but there are so many exceptions. There's so many problems with following that distinction literally that you can only approximate much of the time. See, which is a heavier word. Which slows the sentence right down. And sometimes you want that emphasis even though it's a restrictive clause. So you can't always follow it. That trips right off the tongue so fast. That's one reason why it's read as restrictive, because it melts right into the nouns. But sometimes you want it to be the restrictive with the emphasis, and then you have to violate the rule. So everybody violates it sometimes. But if it's deuces, I mean, if everything else is the same, it's a good rule to follow. All right, let's turn to the homework from number 4. This is on verbs. And the first is just the first person singular pluperfect progressive indicative passive.
Yeah.
Oh. Now, you either get this right or wrong. There's no choice about this. Any deviation from perfection is failure. Jennifer, slowly now.
I don't even know if it's right.
Oh, okay.
I had been being held.
Right. I had been being held. I, first person singular. Pluperfect, had, passive, being held, progressive, being. I had been being held. Next, that's fast. Second person plural present perfect indicative active of kill. The reason I don't ask you because I'm trying to spread the answering around. Marianne.
You have killed.
You have killed. You is the second person plural. Of course, it's usually the second person singular too. Present perfect is have. Indicative is straightforward and active. So it's just you have killed. Yes.
The first one, what would be I was being held?
I was killed.
No, I'm going back.
Yes. I understand.
I was being held.
Right. That that is simply the past. I was killed. It's held. I was held is the past passive, just the regular passive. I held, I was held. It wouldn't be pluperfect. You want to make it pluperfect means one step back in the past. Not that I was, but I had been held. It was completed at a time in the past. The sign of the pluperfect is have or had. Just simply, I was held is the straight past. I held, I was held. You see, it's the past passive. But I want not the past, but the pluperfect. Okay, and I was being held as the pluper is the past progressive. All right, and C, third person singular, present subjunctive passive. Now, third person singular, usually put the word that in advance to give you the sense of the subjunctive. I urge that, and then now, the third person singular is he. What is the present subjunctive passive? I urge that he
Be blessed.
be blessed. He be blessed. You got that? Okay.
Could you say, blessed be him?
Blessed be him. I don't think that is the third person singular then. That construction would be, let him be blessed. Right? And you are then addressing that to someone else, so that's second person, as far as I understand that. And I wanted third person singular. He has to be the subject. And him then becomes the object, you see. So you're not strictly following the assignment. Yes.
I have were he blessed.
Were is not considered the present subjunctive.
Oh, that's right.
Although, I must quickly add that the subjunctive is dying in English. And there are many cases where be sounds so stilted that you use were as the present subjunctive. But technically speaking, were is the past.
Leonard, how about if you were being blessed by?
Well, were again is just what I said. And being makes it progressive. I didn't ask for the progressive, just the straight tense.
Would that be present subjunctive progressive?
Well, were makes it past. He were blessed. If he were blessed, he would have so and so. But as I say, in English, be becomes so archaic in many constructions that were takes on the present.
So you'd have to say if he was being blessed by.
No, that was makes it indicative.
So how would you say?
If he be blessed, you say.
But that's not progressive.
Oh,
How
if
would
you
you
want to make it present progressive, if he be being blessed. If he be being blessed. But it sounds so awful that you wouldn't say it. That's it, it's done. What's that? What did you say?
God bless you.
God bless it, right. All right. Now let's do the corrections of these. Number one, just tell me what it should be and why it's wrong as it's stated. Did she finish yet?
Has she finished?
Has she finished yet? Why is that?
Because if you say, did she finish that, you're asking if she finished it in the past, but you're talking about you're talking in the present.
One word makes it present perspective. Yet means up to now. So you're looking at something from the past through the present, and that requires, by definition, the present perfect tense. So it has to be, has she finished? You could say, did she finish yesterday? But the yet requires the perfect tense. Number two, David is the greatest word Michelangelo has ever created.
Strike the hat.
Who said that? What'd you say?
Strike the hat.
Strike the has. This is the reverse here. What's wrong? Here the perfect tense is wrong. Why? Jim?
Oh, it's all in the past.
The has brings it up to the present, and it implies, well, up to now this is the best Michelangelo is doing, but who knows in the future? Obviously, that present reference is inapplicable because he died long ago. and therefore you can't look at it up to this point. It makes no sense. Therefore, that present perfect tense is completely wrong. You must keep it in the past, so you just have to say the greatest work Michelangelo ever created. Number 3, it's absolutely crucial that you are ready to leave. I knew. Yes.
That it is absolutely crucial that you be ready.
That you be ready.
I know.
Why?
You need the subjunctive because of the emotional content of.
The subjunctive after an issue of necessity or desire. Number 4. The office was very busy, but finally we had caught up on the work. Or
The office had been very busy, but finally we caught up on the work.
well, now wait a minute. You just switched the error, that's all. You've got the same error in another form. What is the point of that? As it stands now, the trouble with it is that the first clause is in the simple past, and the second is in the pluperfect. Right? The past perfect. We had caught up.
That's right, the past perfect.
So all you did is
before
reverse
the
it.
event that finished before the other event.
Well, you'd have to have some special reason for that. Normally, the rule that we're testing for here is the tense has to be the same, unless there's some overriding consideration. So you should either say the office was busy, or very busy, but finally we caught up. Both of them in the simple past. Or you're looking at both of them as having been completed at some point in the past, and you say, the office had been very busy, but finally we had caught up. Now, you're suggesting you want to say the office had been very busy, but finally we caught up. I can't think of a context where you drop the pluperfect like that. Because once you say had been, the implication would be that catching up also finished. I can't think of when you would switch like that. In any normal context, you'd either use two pasts or two pluperfects. You're switching tenses here. Okay, let us look at number 5. Anybody different wants to volunteer, I'll be happy to take some. Just why don't you try out your voice and just see what it sounds like. What's the worst that can happen is that you make a shocking error, right? All right, Lewis.
If a man finds that other men are richer than he
All right.
of course. You don't
A
want
man finds that other men are, puts both of those verbs, finds and are, in what mood?
the indicative.
The indicative. As it stands now, therefore, is what fallacy? Finds and be
Subjunctive.
is a switch from indicative to subjunctive, so it's a switch of mood. Now, by putting it both in the indicative, you're suppressing any idea of contrary to fact. But suppose you want to stress that this is very unlikely. How could you do it and keep the same mood? Yes.
If a man find that other man be.
If a man find that other men be, put both of them in the subjunctive. You see, then it's still consistent mood. Number 6. Cynthia.
If Aristotle and Locke had accepted Plato's
Had accepted Plato's politics, we would not have freedom today. Why do you have to say had accepted?
Because it has to be in the pluperfect because they're dead. And
Well,
I mean, accepted makes it sound as though they're still alive.
yeah, well, because it has to be in the pluperfect because it far precedes today's situation. Their acceptance took place centuries or even millennia ago, and therefore it's an action completed way before the situation of freedom today. And that's precisely the situation where we must have a pluperfect to complete the action in the past. Number 7. Yes.
I am outraged by your begging
By
for money.
your begging for money.
Although it should result in our getting a handout.
Although it should result in our getting a handout. And as it stands here, it is what fallacy?
You don't have the possessive before the gerund.
Yes, it's a gerund without a possessive, and therefore that's what Fowler calls the fused participle. Mixture of participle and gerund. So these are really easy, right? You find this easier?
Then what?
An ambiguous reference. Easier than some other homework. Number 8. Number 8. I see there are a number of eyes that studiously avoid the line. I can't catch them no matter what. There's a whole section on the couch there that looks straight in one direction. Yeah, do you want to try this? Number 8?
It should be, but it may.
That's correct. Gold may seem, but it may not remain one. The second, the might should be may. Why? What is the error as it stands here?
Tense.
Switch of tense from present to past. No justification. Yes.
Although I see the point, can you offer plausibility for why might is past tense? It just doesn't seem to me that it applies.
That just is English. There's can and could, may and might, will and would, etc. The only thing I can say in defense of what you're saying is this. These words have taken on such a conditional flavor, you know, that they are losing the sense of time in people's minds. And might simply, in many people now, rings as simply a possible state of affairs without any time connotation. But in actual development of English, this was the past tense of may.
The sentence, it might be true, incorrect.
Strictly, it should be, it might have been true, or it may be true. But you see, these things become usage at a certain point. It's so colloquial, it rings so true that you just simply say the tense is dying. And then some other distinction between may and might will come out, or else one will ultimately drop out. Yes.
If you reworded that and said gold may seem to be a good investment, but it might not remain so for long, would that be any different?
Absolutely no difference. No justification for changing the tense simply because you change your preposition to an adverb, and your pronoun to an adverb. Number 9. Yes.
Having returned to New York City, the senator went at once.
Should be having returned. It should be the perfect participle, not the present. Why? Tell me why.
The action needs to be completed before the senator went.
Yes, the action precedes the action of the main verb, and that's the use of the perfect participle. Number 10. If Smith should be nominated, he will agree to run. Phil.
If Smith should be nominated, he would agree to run.
You would agree to run. Why? What did you do?
It's subjunctive.
You put the second in the subjunctive to match the conditional subjunctive of the first. In other words, as it stands now, it switches from subjunctive to indicative. Could you give me this whole sentence in the indicative if I do not want to suggest contrary to fact, just to cause and effect? Give me the whole sentence in the indicative.
If Smith is nominated, he will agree to run.
Correct. If Smith is nominated, he will agree. That's just cause and effect. If he should be nominated, he would agree. Is the whole thing contrary to fact in the condition? Yes.
In number 9, would it be correct to say, upon returning to New York City, the senator went at once to the theater, implying that
Yes,
it occurred at the
because in that case, the upon, the preposition names your time, so you don't have to do it by the tense. You could say after he returned, just make a clause of it. All right, number 11. You would not have said that word, I assume, if you had known how much it would have shocked me. Before we get to anything else, can anybody name a parenthetical element in that sentence? I assume, so just throw that out, as far as the grammar is concerned. Now, who sees anything wrong with that sentence? Okay.
There should be a shift in tense. There isn't.
Tell me what the sentence should read as according to you.
You would not have said that word if you had known how much it shocked you.
Well, no. You said if you had known how much it shocked me. You switched to the indicative. It shocked. And the person wants a condition. So the would, there's no grounds to drop the would out and to change the mood. The would is perfectly okay. It would shock. What you have to drop out is the have. Now you have to distinguish mood and tense. The mood of this is okay. The person can say, if you had known how much this would have, you're making a condition of it. But what is wrong with the tense here? Why can't you say, if you had known how much it would have shocked? What is wrong with that construction? Yes.
You're throwing the shocking before the knowing.
And why can't you?
And you cannot be shocked before you know the knowing.
Well, it's not only from that.
Precede.
The had known is as far back as you can get in time. It's the pluperfect. So you can't have something before that. And therefore, it's the same rule that you use a present infinitive after a past verb. And the same thing here. Once you have the pastest past you can have, you can't get still more past. So you just drop out the perfect, it would shock. Or the simple past, if you want to make it indicative, if you have known how much it shocked me. That's if you switch the mood. But that's not necessary. But you can't have, you see, all these have are not there senselessly. They're there for a reason, to locate it in time. And the have wants to take it, in this context, back before something else, but it can't be before because it's already as far back as it can go. So it's like a superfluity of pastness. Is that an acceptable way of putting it?
Question?
Yeah.
Would shock, is that the future?
No, that is the subjunctive present. Would shock is present. And you use the present after that type of past to keep it at the same time. Number 12. I have stopped drinking because I heard no more criticism. All right, yes.
I have stopped drinking because I have heard no more criticism.
All right, you're making both perfect, past, present perfect, right? So you're objecting to it on the ground that it switches tense, right? It switches from the present perfect, I have stopped, to the plain past. And you're saying if the perspective is going to be in the main clause from the past through the present, then it should continue that in the subordinate clause. So both should be I have stopped because I have heard. Could you construct a scenario in which this sentence is justified as worded? You could, if you have a special context. Because remember, in a special context, you don't have to use the same tense. Give me a scenario which would make this sentence as worded acceptable. Yes?
Well, you could have been sure that the criticism had stopped before you actually stopped the drinking.
Right. if there's a time lag, for instance, last year I heard no more criticism. That was over, say, a year ago. And then this week I decided I'm going to stop drinking. It hasn't been criticism for a year, and it took me that much to catch on, and I want to make the difference in time. Then I could say, I have stopped drinking now because last year I heard no more criticism. And if your context makes that clear, that's fine. You can't follow these rules blindly, but in the normal case, if you don't have an overriding factor, then you have to use the same tense. Yes, Louis?
Does this mean he wouldn't stop drinking until people stop criticizing him for drinking? Is that...
Well, it doesn't say this is the only possible cause. It doesn't offer a theory of the cessation of drinking. It simply states that this cause led him to stop. So you'd have to interview him more thoroughly, and since I made up this example, that question is in principle unanswered.
The criticism could refer to his artistic behavior rather than his personal behavior.
Oh, the criticism.
And
yes, well, you'd have to go into a detailed analysis of the character. Number 13. This is a different he, number 13. He explains in detail what the law of gravitation means. All right.
I think it's correct.
Can be considered correct. If you wanted to follow this tense sequence, you could say he explained in detail what the law of gravitation meant, just to keep the consistency. But in this case, means is actually preferable. Why? Because the law of gravitation is that timeless present. It means that if you put it in the past, it would be right, it would be acceptable, but it has the faint overtone of it used to mean that, but it doesn't anymore. And therefore, since it's one of those timeless truths, the content overrides the principle of consistency of tense. That's called the vivid present. You're keeping it in the present to stress it goes on meaning that even though he talked about it yesterday. So that's a stylistic option depending on your emphasis. Now, as I understand it, we still have a couple of minutes. If anybody has a question, I'll take it. Otherwise, I might actually try and get a trifle ahead. Oh, okay. Go ahead, what is it?
Well, I just wondering...
It should be a question about grammar, though, basically.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Have we officially named the 8 tenses? I mean, the 8 parts of speech?
Have we named the parts of speech? Well, I think I did not mention interjection.
Okay.
Now we have. But there's no grammar necessary for whoops. Whichever. Those are not important. Yes.
Are there heroes in the history of grammar, somebody who first identified the parts of speech and...
I'm sure there are, but I don't know them. But probably it's some combination of Latin grammarians and medieval scholars who unearthed them. And then probably early modern people who codified it. I just don't know the names in the field. I don't know anybody in grammar who would be like Aristotle in logic or Euclid in geometry. Although I suppose, if you research it, all these things have to be discovered by somebody.
And do you think the progression would have been to identify the way people were speaking and then to codify that into rules?
Well, originally, I mean, here you're asking me to speculate. Originally, it was done in Latin, at least the English grammar. And they simply observed. Obviously, they did not formulate the rules of grammar before they spoke. So first they had to learn to speak and follow certain patterns, and then they had to abstract what those were, grasp the rules, and then formulate them and make their practice thereby more precise. And then those rules were first adopted intact for English, and then it was discovered that English is in some ways different, and they had to formulate the rules accordingly differently. But you want me to get into metagrammar, the origin of the rules, and we want to just cover the rules. I would like, just for the heck of it, because we have a couple of minutes, actually make a start on the homework for 5, so we can be less rushed.
People with a hard one.
Pardon?
People with a hard one.
No, I thought we'd just pick a few simple ones here. Well, take number 1 for the heck of it. Now, this is the homework for 5 that you didn't get a chance to do yet. But I'm trying to steal a few minutes from next time because we have a long discussion next time. People like she and Ted are disgusting. I would have been ashamed to have told their story to my father, who was an old and tired man. Now raise your hand if you see any error. I'll give you a minute now. Study this. If you see an error, notice the instructions are correct. Any errors in the use of verbals or pronouns. So there are some things that we discussed tonight about infinitives and so on that may happen to be in here. I'm just saying that it may not. Who sees an error? Todd.
I think the she should be her.
People, she should be her. People like her. Why should it be her?
The object of the verb. People want.
Object of the what?
No.
No, like there is not a verb.
No.
It's not people adore or are affectionate toward. It's not that like. It's the like that we discussed under like or as. Remember, it's the, what part of speech is like here? People similar to.
Preposition.
It's a preposition, basically. An adjectival preposition, if you remember. But it is functioning as a preposition, so it takes an object. And therefore, it has to be like her. Now, does anybody see anything else wrong with that first sentence? I would have been ashamed to have told their story to my father. He was an old and tired man.
To tell.
David, you say what? It should be?
To tell.
To tell, not to have told. In other words, you say the perfect infinitive is wrong. Why?
Later time. I would have been ashamed is,
Let's just call it past, okay?
no, I've got
I would have been ashamed, and if the telling would take place at the same time, right? Or at a future time, but not at a
Yeah.
previous time.
Right.
And you only use the perfect infinitive when it is prior to the main verb. And consequently, it has to be, I would have been ashamed to tell. All right, you think you can do one more? Let's do a very easy one. These are all pretty straightforward, but let's do 4 for the heck of it and then call it a night. The day passed quickly eating cake and playing poker.
The day had a good time.
You commented the day had a good time, right? This is what error? Raise your hand if you know. The day passed quickly eating cake and playing poker. The dangling something, correct. So you got about 4 or 5 choices. Because just about anything can dangle. Eating cake and playing poker.
No subject. No subject.
So they presumably are intended to modify something like we or people or whichever, only they don't because the subject isn't there, and therefore they are modifiers, verbal modifiers, and therefore they are participles. Gerunds don't modify, gerunds are nouns. So this is dangling participles, 2 of them. And how could you reconstruct this sentence, keeping the participles now as an exercise, but not dangling them? Eating cake and playing poker, suppose they make it first person plural. Yes.
We passed the day quickly.
Well, I don't know if we can pass a day. I don't know if that's grammatical. You no longer are dangling, but I don't think it's idiomatic to say we passed the day. We passed the time quickly. We found that the day passed quickly.
Passed the time.
The day passed quickly for us?
No. If you say eating cake and playing poker, the day passed quickly for us, the subject is still day. And that still dangles your participle. It has to be, the subject has to be what is modified. You can't have a modifier without a subject expressed. Yes. You.
The day passed quickly as we were eating cake and playing.
Well, then you gave up your participle. You made it a clause, as we were eating. That's okay, but then I want to, just as an exercise, to keep the participle. Yes.
Eating cake and playing poker, we found that the day passed quickly.
Yes, that's fine. Eating, etc. We found that the day passed quickly. Or, time flies when you eat cake. But then you're. On that note, all you have to do now is live and laugh for next time.
Leonard, when one eats cake.
When one eats cake, correct. Because we want a general and not just a specific. Okay.